Go.
Okay. Well, good evening, everyone. Thank you for joining us tonight. We're going to have a very interesting program, and we will start in just a few minutes. I want to let you know that our May Arts Alive concert is this Sunday, the 15th at 2 p.m. Dave Rudolph is coming back. If you haven't seen him before, he's lots of fun. Besides good music, he injects a lot of humor into the hour of entertainment he provides. And he plays a few original tunes, but mostly just old favorites. And he takes requests. And like I said, it's just very much fun, very relaxing. It's a virtual concert, so sign up online, just like you did for tonight's program. The next Thursday on May 19th at 6:30, we have a program on consumer protection. I think this is an important topic. I'm very interested in what we'll learn. We're having a rep from the Illinois Illinois State Attorney General's office. And they are going to give us advice on what to do if we have been victimized by fraud or deception. And they're also going to give us some tips on how to avoid scams. So again, I think that's pretty timely, and unfortunately, it's happening a lot. So we'll get some tips on how to avoid that. But tonight we have Shipwrecks, Treasures of the Great Lakes. Cal Cothrade is with us. He's a photographer and diver, and he is going to share with us some stunning photographs of some of the shipwrecks in the Great Lakes, and he's going to share the stories of some of all of the tragedies that he shows us the pictures of. He's going to tell the stories also. So I can't wait. So please welcome Cal Cothrade.
Hey, thank you very much, Janet and Mike. Real pleasure to be here, and thanks to everybody tuning in tonight from wherever you are. I see we have some names I know. Mark, good to see you. Ross, if I didn't mention your name, I'm sorry. It's nothing personal. So anyways, thanks for tuning in. Let's just get right down to it. I'm going to hit the share screen and get this thing started. And we're going to learn about some shipwrecks in the Great Lakes. We're going to actually go to 3 of the 5 Great Lakes, and some of you might actually even some of you are divers, so some of you have maybe been on these wrecks, so hopefully you see them from a different standpoint through my photos. At any rate, let's get started. So tonight's presentation is really kind of a primer to Great Lakes shipwrecks, and we're going to talk about why there's so many of them and how they got there. And I'm also going to share, as I said before, some of my favorite photographs of 10 really interesting wrecks, several of which are in your own home waters there of Lake Michigan. And then afterwards, I will answer any questions that you might have about underwater photography, shipwrecks, diving, Great Lakes, whatever comes to mind, I'll do my best to answer it. And the only bad question is the one unasked. So with that, let's get into it. In July of 1679, French explorer Robert Lasalle made history in a way that I'm pretty sure he didn't intend. He launched a vessel that would become the very first shipwreck ever on the upper Great Lakes. Now, Lasalle's bark was a 45-ton wooden sailing ship named Griffin, and it was constructed at the mouth of Cayuga Creek in western New York. That's about 3 miles upriver from Niagara Falls. It was one of the first European-built vessels on the lakes, and only a few months after it was constructed, in mid-September, when it left Washington Island in Wisconsin's Door County on a fair summer day, it vanished forever into the pages of history. Now, the vessel, along with its cargo of furs, 5 cannons, and crew of 5, they were never seen or heard from again. The Griffin has yet to be positively identified or found. And though it was the first shipwreck on the upper Great Lakes, it sure wouldn't be the last. Since then, it's estimated that maybe as many as 6,000 vessels have made their way to the bottom of the lakes. Collective body of water so large that they represent 21% of the Earth's fresh water. They have nicknames reflective of their size, like the Big Five and the Third Coast. They're really more inland seas than they are lakes. And they're so massive, in fact, that they manufacture their own weather, and their storms can be as deadly to man and ship as anything on the world's oceans. Traveling by boat on the Great Lakes was not to be taken lightly 340 years ago, and not 100 years ago, and certainly not today either. So maybe you're still pondering the number I just gave you a minute ago, 6,000. Why so many wrecks? I mean, what's causing all these ships to sink? Well, in order to understand the answers to these questions, you kind of have to realize that in the 1800s, when the Midwest was really starting to expand, there were no interstates, right? No semi trucks. The roads that they did have were very poor. The fastest, easiest, cheapest way to move people and goods was by ship. Nearly everything moved by way of lakes and rivers. Thousands of vessels, from small schooners all the way up to large steamers. They're all trying to get from point A to point B, from this port to that port, and they're trying to do it as quickly as possible. Now, throw into the pot vicious summer squalls, hurricane winds, monster waves, dense fog, and whiteout snowstorms. Add in an equal amount of human error, captain's misjudgment, and profit-driven corporate greed. Stir that vigorously and top off with an icing of no GPS, no radar, no weather forecasting, and in the early days, no radio. What you've got is a recipe for disaster. Lives and ships lost. Whether it be ship-to-ship collision, running aground, fire, sinking from disrepair and neglect, massive waves, or ice, there are a lot of ways to sink a ship on the Great Lakes. And thus, over the decades, a museum of maritime history has been slowly assembled on the bottom of the Great Lakes. Archaeological gems, each virtually frozen in time. There are few comparable examples of sites on dry land that are so undisturbed and pristine, except maybe tombs or caves. Oftentimes, divers get to see sites like this when we visit a shipwreck. We can see the everyday items that our ancestors used. The coffee pot, the stove that warmed the coffee that was in that pot, the dishes they ate that breakfast from that morning, and even the tools they used to fix their ship. The clothing they wore as well. So diving on a wreck, it's like going back in time. Now, in order to do that, we need to be able to breathe underwater. And man has been trying to do this for hundreds of years using various contraptions. Fortunately, in 1943, another Frenchman by the name of Jacques Cousteau helped invent something called the Demand Regulator. It was a device which significantly increased bottom times. It also opened the floodgates for what would become a new sport and ultimately a multi-billion-dollar industry. Now today, with advancements in equipment, such as rebreathers, divers can safely go deeper and stay longer than ever before. And one piece of equipment I rarely leave behind is my camera, because photographing shipwrecks is kind of one of my passions. It's really the main reason I dive. So now that we know why so many ships go to the bottom, let's take a look at some photos that really exemplify the diversity of those Great Lakes shipwrecks, while at the same time showcasing their haunting beauty. We're going to start off in Georgian Bay, a part of Lake Huron. And we're going to start with the steamer Manitou. It was laid up for the winter already. And the steamer Manitou was pressed into service for one last run of the year. It was supposed to bring 100 head of cattle back to the mainland from Manitoulin Island. Well, less than 12 hours into the trip home, the weather started kicking up, and the ship, with 21 souls aboard, it began to list. Within minutes, she rolled over onto her side, then slid below the waves stern first. As she hit the bottom over 200 feet below, her captain, some of the crew, and the owner of the cattle were floating in a life raft, cold and wet, for 2.5 days before being rescued. Westerly winds blew them nearly across the entire width of Georgian Bay, and prior to getting to the other shore, the wind changed direction and it blew them basically back to close to where the whole ordeal began. Now, it's suspected that the herd of cattle broke loose from their pen and the shifting weight caused the vessel to roll. Now, before we actually look at the photographs underwater, let's look at this picture here of the Manitou in better times. And we see the pilot houses on the second deck up front here. And there's a beautiful staircase and railing coming down from the pilot house deck to the main deck. There's also some lifeboats on the back. She carried 4 lifeboats, a smokestack, and she has some holes on the side here. Those are the ports where they would load cargo into the cargo deck underneath the main deck. All right, so let's take a look at that beautiful pilot house and staircase. Now, a lot of times when a vessel such as this sinks, the wooden superstructure that the decks and things like the pilot house will blow off because air pressure gets built up in the ship. And if it sinks too quickly, that air pressure can just blow those wooden structures apart and it can blow them off completely. Sometimes we see shipwrecks many times without ever seeing the cabins because they were completely blown off. This wreck still has them in place, which is just absolutely cool. Now, this main window right in front here, if I want you to imagine if you could stand right there on that deck in front of that window and look inside, this is what you would see. The helm of the ship's wheel, still with its paint, either blue or black, I'm not sure which, and red, still just in beautiful condition. There is a compass right in front of that wheel, right at the base of that window there. And if you were standing at that wheel, helming that ship in its last few minutes before it goes down, wondering when is the captain going to order the abandoned ship? When, am I going to die here? If you went in your mind to say, what time is it? You would look to your left and you would see the clock on the wall to the left of that wheel. And here it is, all these years later, over 100 years later, still sitting on the wall there. Now the hands have rusted away, but there's the clock. So a lot of just fantastic artifacts on this wreck. Now, we did talk about those lifeboats. Well, there were 4 of them. One of them was launched and used by the people who managed to get off the wreck. The other 3 are still on the wreck or on the lake bottom. One is at the stern on the bottom of the lake next to the starboard side. Another one is right underneath the smokestack here, which fell on top of it and crushed it. The 3rd lifeboat is the one in the foreground. And the really cool part is if you look at the bow of this lifeboat, you can see all these decades later, the handwriting that some crew member put on there with dimensions, probably L for length, B for beam, D for depth, and then these others, I'm not quite sure what those might be, but they were scratching notations on there for their own use, and there they are still there. That's the human side of things coming in. And of course, the 4th lifeboat was the one that was actually used and blown across Georgian Bay twice. Now, the cargo deck where the cattle were also carried a very interesting item, a 1927 Chevrolet 2-door coupe. Now, this vessel went down in 1928. And so the vessel was 1 year old, and it actually belonged to the owner of the cattle, who was the one who hired the boat and brought it back out of its winter mothball state for that final fatal voyage. In this picture is my dive partner, Steve Weimer, the second, photographing that 27 Chevy coupe. Here's a better look at it through that loading port hatch, and you can even see the bow tie on the grill, almost like the day it was made, that bow tie emblem. Pretty cool stuff. All right, so that was the Manitou. We're going to stay in Lake Huron, and we're going to move up to the tip of the Bruce Peninsula, which is Tobermory, Ontario, sort of a shipwreck destination. It is a choke point, and so vessels going between Georgian Bay and Lake Huron will travel right past Tobermory at that point. And There's a lot of wrecks. There's a lot of rock reefs there. There's a lot of bad weather there. And there's also some incredibly clear water. So if you're a diver, it's a great place to go photograph shipwrecks. So we're going to look at the bark Arabia. She was a 31-year-old two-masted sailing ship, and it was bringing corn from Chicago to Midland, Ontario, when she got caught in a fierce storm near Tobermory. The crew manned those pumps for 18 hours before finally giving up on their ship. They just couldn't keep the water from coming in. And they launched the yawl boat, which is their lifeboat. And they rowed to the safety of a very nearby island known as Echo Island, which is also now called Horse Island, in reference to the several horses aboard the vessel which swam to the island upon the sinking, where they actually lived out the rest of their lives. So in 1985, a stone memorial to the wreck was placed on the bottom of the lake at the stern, right next to the shipwreck, to commemorate the 100th anniversary of its loss. Now, we don't have a picture of the Arabia. As far as we know, none exists, but, at least not before she sank. So the day that I dove this, we had some pretty good visibility, and come down the line, which is moored to a heavy weight on the lake bottom off the bow. And as I was swimming to the vessel, had this great view. And I turned this into a black and white photo because sometimes the color of the water can actually detract from the details of the wreck. But we see that she has a beautiful bowsprit, and her standing rigging, her bobstay chains are still in place. There's still an anchor chain and two large woodstock anchors. It's really a beautiful wreck. If you swim underneath that bowsprit, you'll come out on the port side. And this is what it looked like to us as we were diving it in color. She also has a mast, which is sort of laying on that port railing. And that's kind of a unique thing because it has a trestle tree on it, which would be the point at which the lower mast and the upper mast are joined together. And there's some wood boards there that people can actually stand on when they're furling or climbing up the rigging to get into the rigging to manipulate sails and so forth. You better look at that mast. It's not a very common thing. Usually this stuff breaks in a shipwreck, or the masts are scattered or gone completely. There's also some wood rigging blocks on this wreck. Also up on the bow, we can see that beautiful jib boom and that bowsprit. And there's a windlass right here, which was the mechanism for lifting and lowering the anchor chains and the anchors. A better look at those two huge heavy woodstock anchors. Just beautiful. And they're still right where they would have been kept when they were sailing, stowed, never attempted to deploy them, hanging from the cat heads here. A lot of technical ship term here. So if we slide a little bit back from the bow towards the stern, there's a centerboard pocket. So this had a keel that would swing up and down, allowing it to access shallower ports so that it wouldn't ground out. And then once they got out into deeper water, they could drop that centerboard down. This was a pocket it would swing up into. And in the foreground here is a beautiful wood double sheaved block. And another look at that mast, which has fallen down and lying on the port rail. So now we are at the very aft end of the vessel, the stern. The stern is not as structurally intact as the bow, and part of it has fallen away, and it is now sitting sort of on an angle, as you can see here on the lake bottom. And the wheel, the helm, has fallen to the lake bottom as well. But here Steve Weimer is lighting up that memorial plaque set on the bottom in 1985. Right, that was the bark Arabia. We are going to shift over to the big lake they call Gitchagumi, as they say in the Gordon Lightfoot song, to Isle Royale in Lake Superior, to the prop Henry Chisholm. She had just left Duluth on her way to Buffalo, New York, when she ran into a storm. See, there's a pattern developing here. She weathered the storm okay, but she had to cut loose her consort during the ordeal. And after the storm passed, the Chisholm spent the next couple of days actually motoring around searching for that 220-foot vessel that she had been towing before casting it loose. And while attempting to make harbor, she herself ran aground on a reef near Rock of Ages Lighthouse. And much of the vessel actually was salvaged before the remains were broke up by yet another storm just a week later. The double expansion steam engine wound up hitting the bottom of the lake in 140 feet of water, standing upright. We're going to take a look at that in a second. She was carrying 92,000 bushels of barley at the time of her sinking. Not surprisingly, the Chisholm frequently set cargo capacity records during her 18-year career. This is what's left of the stern, and we are looking straight on at the side of what's left of the prop. And when I say that, it's because she's missing 1.5 blades of her 4 blades. There's a good chunk of that one missing, and that entire blade is gone. This is what happens when steel props meet rock reefs. The reef always wins. And you can see that that's a very large propeller, as exhibited by my friend Scott Bruss on the bottom of the lake there. This is the bottom of this massive multiple expansion steam engine. And this is the transmission and the drive shaft, which would go back towards the prop. This is about 1/2 of that engine, and it stands probably 25 or 30 feet tall off the lake bottom. Here is the top, well, half or 2/3 of it. A very intricate piece of iron. And when you get up close to it, this is a beautiful thing about Lake Superior. You can see that there are no quagga mussels, which in every other photo of shipwrecks or submerged things in any of the other 4 lakes, the 4 other lakes, you will see quagga mussels, those thousands and millions of those little bivalves. Lake Superior is the only lake to not yet be inundated with those things. And so when you dive in Lake Superior, you get to see the details of the wood construction of the ships and the ornate ironwork. I mean, if you look at the beautiful detailing on this iron top to the steam engine, this is purely ornamental. There's nothing functional about this. This comes from a time, the mid to late 1800s, when people really cared about the things they were making. It was just a different world back then. Bottom line wasn't always money, although it still was, but not necessarily always. At any rate, so you can see the rusticles forming on this, and that's just the beauty of diving in Lake Superior. This is a 4-image mosaic of that double expansion steam engine. And what I mean by a 4-image mosaic is the clarity of the water just wasn't good enough the day that I dove it in order to get so far away that I could get the entire 30-foot tall object in my camera in one photo. So rather than snapping one photo from so far away you'd never see it, I took 4 photos from pretty close up so that there was at least some detail, and I mean pretty close up, 15 feet away. And then I stitched those together by hand in Photoshop, blending them seamlessly together to give what I call a one single impossible photo. So that was the engine of the Chisholm. So staying in Lake Superior in the same area, just moving to the other side of Isle Royale, is the Chester Congdon. And after 11 years on the lakes, she ran aground when she was fogged in at Canoe Rocks. She was carrying 380,000 barrels of wheat from Thunder Bay, Ontario. So this is a much larger vessel. It's a modern day freighter, so to speak. 2 days after grounding, a storm tore her in 2 as she sat on top of that reef, and then she sank. But many of the ship's furnishings were salvaged while she was still floating on the top of the reef before the second storm just completely tore it apart. The wreck was the first on Lake Superior to be valued at over $1 million. So a neat thing about how this ship sank is that storm that tore the head off of it. It's kind of like tearing the head off a snake, I guess. it went down one side of the reef, turned 180 degrees around, slid backwards, while the rest of the ship went down the other side of the reef. So they're actually two separate dives. And I never have had a chance to dive the stern area, but the bow is what we're going to take a look at. It sits in about 100 feet of water, staring straight up the reef towards the surface, wondering what happened to the rest of itself. And this is the camera's level. That's the angle of the reef that the bow is sitting on. So this would be the pilot house up here with decks down here and then more decks below that. And it's kind of a fun wreck. You can crawl around inside there. Pretty opened up. There's not any really debris in there. As I said, it was partially salvaged. So there's not too many entanglement hazards, but there is a lot of mangled debris from that violent tearing apart of the ship still on the bottom of the lake. And again, you can see that visibility is kind of hazy, kind of almost like a fog bank, which gives it a really kind of spooky feel when you're down there diving. Hard to photograph in these conditions. Staying on Lake Superior, we're going to move away from the national park that is Isle Royale, and we're going to go over to Munising, Michigan, and we're going to talk about a different type of vessel, a sailing vessel, a wooden sailing ship, the Bermuda. She was reportedly had 2 feet of water in her bilge when she took on a load of iron ore at Marquette, Michigan. And pounding waves from a storm and now a badly leaking hull forced her captain to seek shelter in Munising Bay, where in the middle of the night, she sank, sadly taking 3 crewmen with her. Now, she sat there on the bottom of Munising Bay for 13 years, and then the salvage company came along and floated it, and they towed it to nearby Murray Bay for a their salvage crew took it to Murray Bay where they were going to do something with it. I'm not sure exactly which, I suppose salvage it. And it's here that her lifting chain slipped, and the vessel once again settled on the bottom of the lake, but now in a very shallow protected bay, only 25 feet deep, safe from the ravages of storms and large ice flows. She was 10 years old when she sank the first time. So as I said before, it's pretty shallow, and it's really a favorite destination of glass bottom tour boats. They run out of Munising, Michigan, taking tourists, probably hundreds, maybe thousands every season. And they sort of will hover over the vessel. They'll use their side thrusters. They'll move from bow to stern, and they'll allow people to look down onto the decks of this wooden vessel. As you can see by this picture, my friend Reason Pylant is demonstrating some free diving that day, and that the waves are right there on the surface, very shallow. Sun bathes the decks, but the water is very turbid because we had to wait for one of these tour boats to finish its tour and then leave before we could actually come and anchor up with our boat and get in the water and dive it. So by the time we got in the water, there was a lot of sand and silt still sort of floating in the water column due to the jet wash and the prop wash from the tour boat. So I kind of like the picture. It looks like it's just a pirate ship coming out of the gloom, demonstrated here by my friend Steve Weimer. And again, look at the detail, the wood and how the pieces fit together. This is the hole where the anchor chain and the anchor would have gone through, and the anchor would have hung up here on the railing. So because we don't have all those nasty quagga mussels attached to everything, we can really enjoy these things, the details of them. The picture on the left was taken from inside the cargo hold. There are some areas on the deck where the boards are missing, the deck boards, but you can still see your partial load of iron ore inside the cargo hold. Picture on the right is the cutwater, the very leading edge of the bow, and where it contacts with the lake bottom. And I believe this is, it may be part of the bowsprit, or it might be a winter mooring buoy to keep chain up. I'm not exactly sure, but beautiful detailing on that wood there. So we're at the very aft, or the round end of the boat, as I like to say, the stern. And this is the rudder. This is what steered it. Reason's a big guy. Reason's probably about 6'5", maybe 300 pounds. He's got very large man hands, and you can see his hands look tiny compared to the thickness of this rudder. It's probably 6 inches thick at least. Just a massive, massive slab of wood. And also he's free diving with his on breath hold, and my buddy Steve and I were on doubles, which is technical gear. So I like to call this the tech no tech photograph. All right, we're going to leave Lake Superior behind and jump into northern Lake Michigan now. Coming down the Wisconsin coast, we are just off of Dorr Peninsula. We're going to talk about the Frank O'Connor, which was built in 1892 as one of 3 sisters. And at 301 feet long, the vessel was pretty much pushing the limits of wooden boat building with an assist of large iron straps called hogging. Now, the 26-year-old vessel was carrying 3,000 tons of coal from Buffalo, New York to Milwaukee when she caught fire in the bow. Cause of the fire to this day is unknown, but the ship had been carrying grain all season, according to its to the records, and the dust left behind from that grain was no doubt like a tinder. So it's not hard to imagine how that fire started. Any little spark could have set it. Now, she was 10 miles offshore when the fire started, and hoping to run her aground, the captain steered for shore. Well, he got pretty close. He came within 2 miles of shore. He was hoping to beach it, basically, to save the vessel, when the steering gear burned through completely and it no longer had any control of which direction it was going to go. That's when the captain and the crew abandoned ship. They took to the lifeboats. Now, the Cana Island lighthouse keeper assisted the crew by towing them in their lifeboats away from the burning wreck with his powerboat. The vessel could be seen burning well into the night. I'm sure it was just a blazing inferno. There's a lot of wood there. She was powered by a massive triple expansion steam engine, not unlike the one from the Chisholm that we looked at not long ago. And that huge, powerful steam engine could turn the 12-foot diameter prop at 85 RPMs. And that's actually pretty fast when you think about it for that large a piece of steel. So this is the stern. And 2 things you're going to notice. Probably the first thing is, why is the water so green? Well, I did not alter these photos for the color in any way. That is exactly how the water looked that day when we dove it. There was a huge algae bloom going on, and it's not a deep wreck. It's only about 60 feet deep. So the water was just emerald green, top to bottom. But this also shows you the massive debris on the lake bottom, as well as that 12-foot diameter prop. Now, keep in mind, she did burn. So it means that she pretty much burned to the water line. Anything that was below the water sank and it didn't catch fire. Anything above the water was just burnt up. We'll take another look at that beautiful prop from straight on behind it. And this large flat thing on the lake bottom in the foreground is actually the rudder laying over on its side. And again, Steve Weimer is shining his light on the edge of that huge prop. Quite a sight. So there's not a whole lot of structure to the wreck left anymore. As I said, it did burn, but if you swim the football field length all the way up to the bow, on the way up there, you're going to come across that huge triple expansion steam engine. We actually had, despite green water, very good visibility that day. And I was able to get pretty far back away and get it all in one shot. And then this round thing off to the side is actually one of her twin boilers, which we have a better look at right here. 2 boilers and the steam engine. Now, if you continue that very, very long swim up to the bow, you will be rewarded with a large anchor and a very large pile of anchor chain, which is pretty much where it came to rest on the lake bottom. And there are a few other things along the way. There's some steam operated deck pumps and things of that nature interspersed along the trip up there. So that was the Frank O'Connor. Wow, the Rouse Simmons. Probably the most famous shipwreck in Lake Michigan, in my opinion. And famous for what, you ask? Well, she is famous for bringing Christmas trees to Chicago market from the Michigan UP at the end of each shipping season. Her captain, Captain Scheunemann, would sell those trees direct from the deck of the schooner, cheaper than anyone else in Chicago because there was no middleman. He'd sell them direct to the public. And this was something that over the years endeared him to the public, to the masses, and it became a Chicago tradition in its own time. Now, the vessel left Thompson Harbor, Michigan, with over 5,000 Christmas trees stuffed on it, which was reportedly somewhat overloaded. And on the 23rd of November in 1912, and keep in mind 1912, that's the same year the Titanic sank, so this is a ways back, she sailed straight into an early winter storm. And prior to sinking, we know that 2 of the crew and the yawl boat were washed overboard by a large wave. How do I know this? How do we know this? Because there was a message in a bottle that was found sometime after the wreck that was written by someone on board, and they did make that exclamation about 2 people being washed overboard as well as their lifeboat. The vessel tried valiantly, of course, to reach safe harbor, and they could not, and they were never seen again until 1971, when she was discovered by famed Bayview, Wisconsin resident shipwreck hunter Kent Bell Richard, who is in the lore of Great Lakes shipwreck hunters. He is one of the original guys who just, found slews of vessels, tons of vessels, and Rouse Simmons was one of them. So I guess I could have moved to the slide a little earlier. Sorry for that, folks, but just sort of recapping what we talked about. She's in about 170 feet of water. Everyone aboard died, and it's estimated that it was 16 folks that lost their lives. She was also known as the Christmas tree ship. There's been plays and books and all kinds of things written about this very, very famous shipwreck. Now, as schooners go, it's not the most intact schooner I've ever seen on the bottom of the lakes, but it's the Christmas tree ship. It's a must dive on every wreck diver's hit list. You have to at least dive it once. It's a little tough to get to. It's just north of Two Rivers, Wisconsin. There's not a whole lot of choices if you don't own your own boat for getting a ride out to it. But I did manage to dive it once. And I'm going to tell you that the visibility on this dive is the best visibility I ever had on any Great Lakes dive since or before. The 140 feet of visibility. This is what the quagga mussels did to the lakes. They cleaned it up, so to speak, water clarity. Now, if you look at these dark spots on the lake bottom, that is quagga mussels, just mats of quagga mussels. And you can see more of them out here in front of the bow. The light spots are the sandy clay bottom. So here is the windlass and the anchor chain that would have used to haul the anchors up with. Speaking of the anchors of the Rouse Simmons, I know for a fact that if you want to go see one of them, all you have to do is travel to the Milwaukee Yacht Club in downtown Milwaukee, Wisconsin. They have one of those very large fluked anchors out in front in the grass outside their front door. Beautiful anchor. Another shot, you can actually see some of the Christmas trees underneath here in the hold still there. For years and years and years, trees would occasionally wash up in fishermen's nets and things of that nature. Now we are way out in front of the vessel, and we're looking at some of her masts, which this 3-masted vessel, and when she sank, she hit bow first, and all of the masts snapped off and sort of fell forward. And they are laying on the lake bottom here. But this is the visibility. It's just staggering. Never seen anything like it. This is my favorite image from that. This is a 124-foot long vessel, and I'm 10, 15 feet out in front of it, and we can see the transom or the very back edge of it. So that's where I come up with my 140 feet. I mean, it's better visibility than I get in Cozumel, Mexico when I go dive down there in the Caribbean. Another shot of that. leaving the Christmas tree ship and sliding on down to Milwaukee is the Prinz Willem 5. Now, Prinz Willem is actually a modern day tragedy. She was a 258-foot long steel freighter from the Netherlands, and it sank when it collided with an oil barge that was being towed behind a tugboat. This happened in 1954. So recent times, she had functional radar on board the vessel, but it was turned off at the time, and the captain was off the bridge. She had just cleared Milwaukee's harbor on her return trip back to Europe. And at just 5 years old, this was only her 25th trip to the region. And after striking that barge, she went straight to the bottom in 90 minutes. Now, she had been sunk once before. However, this was during construction by the retreating German army during World War II. They actually captured it while it was being built. And they were trying to use it for their own purposes. And when the Allies began to take Europe back, and they started taking back the Netherlands, the German army retreated. They dynamited it, putting it on the bottom of one of the rivers that fed into Rotterdam Harbor in an attempt to aid in their escape. So there was 29 souls aboard, and when it sank, and thankfully they were all saved by the Coast Guard cutter Hollyhock. But the wreck, unfortunately, has claimed, I believe, the lives of 4 divers since it went down in 1954. This was my very first ever magazine cover, so I'm kind of proud of this. This was actually a 3-image mosaic, again, making that one impossible image out of multiple images. It's coming straight at us. And you might say, well, why is it on its right side? Well, that's just the way it ended up landing when it hit the bottom. It rolled over onto its starboard side. It sits at probably a 70-degree angle or so. And so she's coming straight at us. We have about 80 feet of visibility in this photograph. There are 2 large masts, one on the forward part of the vessel and one on the aft part of the vessel. And there are cargo hatches forward and aft of each of those masts. And this mast is the crane that they would have used to load and unload cargo into the holds. This is still the bow. We're still looking towards the stern. We're closer to that aft mast. Good visibility on this shot. But what I wanted to show you in this picture was how the hull just sort of recedes into the lake bottom. And then you can just sort of see off on the right side here, sort of a ledge, a dark ledge. And that is the water currents moving around the stationary vessel, carving out the sand and clay bottom of the lake slowly over the decades. The vessel continues to sort of settle and sink its way deeper and deeper into the lake bottom. But there is a cliff face 5-6 feet high or so kind of around this vessel in many areas due to those water currents. Now, this was not taken on the same day. Visibility was not quite so good. We had a little bit of murk in the water, but my friend Dirk Wilhelm is shining his dive light onto the pilot house windows. Those are the windows the captain should have been looking out when they rammed that, collided with that oil barge. And then this is the smokestack here. So you can really get a good feel for the angle at which this vessel is laying over on its side. Now we're just behind the smokestack. This is the tail end of the smokestack here. This is a 6-panel skylight over the engine room. It goes down through multiple decks, all the way down to the engine room. That's how they got large parts in and out of the engine room by crane through these skylight windows that they could remove. Also, that's how they got natural light down there. And Dirk is shining his light through one of those windows at some equipment inside there. Those are just big enough that a diver can squeeze through, typically if he's wearing like a single tank. But as you see in this picture, we're wearing double tanks in these dives, in this dive anyways. And so that's a little bit bulky, especially with the decompression bottles that we're carrying on our sides. A little bit too much gear to squeeze through one of those windows. But easier with a single tank. So if you do squeeze through one of those windows, as we have, and we are now actually in the engine room, we're a couple decks lower into the vessel. This is the top of the engine. It was a 5-cylinder diesel, and this is the size of those 5-cylinder heads that we're looking at right here. And my dive partner, Brian Bachholt, and I planned this photo shoot. It was something that we intended to get in and do as many pictures as we could of the engine room. Unfortunately, crawling in there, there's a lot of debris that you have to maneuver around. There's a lot of silt. And as careful as one might be, you still stir up a lot of this silt. It's very fine. It comes up like a cloud into the water and it just expands. About a second and a half after I shot this photograph, I was enveloped in a cloud of silt, and the photo shoot was effectively over because we could no longer get any clear pictures. But at least we got this good shot here. Here we are actually in one of the cargo bays. There are 4 cargo hatches that were 20 foot by 20 foot square, openings in the main deck that would have been covered with wood, and those covers are now gone, and we're looking out through one of them. These 55-gallon drums are part of the original cargo that it sank with. Okay, probably the single photograph I am most proud of in my entire career, the truly impossible shot. The only picture in the existence that I know of the vessel in its entirety as it lies on the bottom. 55 still photos required to get to this point, all stitched together by hand. And just to give you a sort of a size reference, there's little divers sort of speckled throughout. You can see their tanks in the light and their air bubbles going up towards the surface. So 258 feet long, just shy of a football field, 80 feet deep, laying over on its starboard side. Just a fantastic dive. It's a lot of fun. It's got a lot of penetration capabilities. If you're trained and so inclined, you can go inside certain areas of the ship. And it can be disorienting because it is on its side. So as you move horizontally through the ship, you may be moving down decks as far as the ship is concerned, because it is on its side. And as you move up and down, you're actually moving laterally along a certain deck. So it takes a little practice to get used to. Okay, the St. Albans, also off of Milwaukee, a small wooden steamer regularly ferried people and package goods back and forth between Wisconsin and Michigan. It's about an 80-mile trip across the lake at that point. She rammed a cake of pack ice while bound for Ludington in January of 1881. So they were really running early into the year, but late through 1880 into January. Shortly after she left Milwaukee, they hit that ice. They turned around. They tried to make it back to port in Milwaukee, but the hole was too big. She took on too much water. She filled up. She foundered 15 miles offshore. Now, all 27 people aboard survived the ordeal by rowing their lifeboats to shore. So thankfully, no one there died. And think about that, 20, people rowing 15 miles in big, heavy wooden lifeboats. That's quite an ordeal right there. Unfortunately, although everybody survived, a cow and her calf who were aboard perished in the sinking when they were unable to launch their own lifeboat due to having hooves and no thumbs. A little dark humor there, sorry. Okay. If you stand in front of the bow and the ship comes at you, this is what you see. A little broke up. Part of the bow has broken away from the rest of the vessel. But the really cool thing about this dive, this shipwreck, is the debris field. If you've noticed, we also have really good visibility in this picture as well, 80 feet anyways. And there is just stuff all over the bottom of the lake. This was a violent impact when it hit. And also just through degradation and things of that nature. Now it's pretty deep. It's about 165 feet deep. So it's not too terribly subject to currents or storm or surge action, not like something that would be 70, 60 feet deep, but Yeah, a lot of debris. Now we are at the stern looking forward. This is part of the steam engine that propelled it. This is a capstan on the aft fantail that would have been used for hauling in mooring lines and things of that nature. And underneath Steve and in front of him is the smokestack, or part of the smokestack. And again, look at that debris field, just crazy. Now, another little odd thing, if you look at the tip of my cursor, there's a little white dot on the deck. That is the dome port of Steve's underwater camera reflecting the light as he set it up on its back on the deck. Because when he got down to the bottom, to the wreck, and he turned his camera on, or tried, he realized that he never put a charged battery in it and the batteries were dead. So rather than push that thing around the whole dive, he just set it there. That's where the anchor, or the line that the dive boat was tied off to was, so that he wouldn't forget it when we went back up. So that meant that he was my devoted dive model for the entire dive that day. And I made good use of them. We got some pretty good pictures. This one on the left here is probably one of my favorite top 5 all-time photographs that I've taken of any shipwreck. When I think of shipwreck, I think of damage and tragedy and everything. And even though nobody died on this one, it still looks like somebody might have. Picture on the right is Steve kindly lighting up the prop, and you can see that the rudder is turned to starboard just a little bit. So there's a little bit more structure at the stern with the engine and everything, and the prop and the rudder. Fun dive. All right, last one. We're going to finish off with the Carr Ferry, Milwaukee, which is off of Fox Point, suburb north of Milwaukee. And this vessel was lost in October 22nd, actually, of 1929. So this was just 1 week to the day before the massive stock market crash of 1929 that sent, of course, the nation spiraling into perhaps its worst depression ever. It was a storm of a different kind, though, of course, that sent the Carr Ferry to the bottom of the lake while it was attempting to make Grand Haven, Michigan. She had been seen by the harbor's lighthouse ship pitching and rolling badly in heavy seas soon after it left Milwaukee's harbor. And like so many other sea tales, they too turned around. They tried to make it back to the port, but they foundered, presumably from a badly bent sea gate. And we'll talk about that in a second. And flooding of the stern section of the vessel and the lower decks due to the large waves. Unfortunately, all hands were lost when this thing went down, about 46 people. Lifeboat showed up on the other side of the lake in Michigan with several would-be survivors' bodies in it, frozen stiff. Now, that lifeboat can be viewed by visiting the lighthouse in Port Washington, Wisconsin. It is usually on display in the yard outside of the lighthouse. So when I say a car ferry, I don't mean automobile cars. I mean rail cars, train cars. And the reason, there was a whole bunch of ships that looked very similar, sister ships, very similar to the Milwaukee, and they were used to transfer railroad cars back and forth between Wisconsin and Wisconsin and Michigan, thereby completely avoiding the quagmire that was the rail yards in Chicago, where cars could get held up for days and weeks, delaying shipments. And so if somebody wanted something fast, or they didn't want to go through Chicago, they put them on one of these vessels here. This was a really large ship. It was 330 some feet long, and it was a steel hull. And this is what it would look like if it were coming straight at you. So Dirk, Wilhelm, and Mike Crone are swimming from starboard side to port side of the ship across the bow. This is the ship's steel mast. It wasn't a sailing vessel, of course. It was a steamer, but it had a mast anyways for equipment and things of that nature. And that's laying on the bottom there. This thing is really coming apart as the years go by. It's just pulling apart due to age, and it's becoming kind of a dangerous thing to get inside of. Now, we were talking about that badly bent sea gate that was pounded by the waves. This is it. It's mangled up. It's supposed to be a straight flat piece that goes across the back. This is the back deck, and you can see the steel rails that the rail cars would roll onto the deck of the ship. And this sea gate, they suspect, was pounded and bent in from the waves, and then the water was no longer able to be kept out, and it just flooded through grates in the floor into the lower decks. And that's, again, a message in the bottle was found from somebody who wrote his last sentences before perishing on this sinking. And he said that they had water coming in to the crew quarters through the grates over that deck. So one of the really, really cool things about this shipwreck is it has two propellers, two props, two prop shafts. And the starboard prop, which is the one we're looking at here, is the shaft is sitting on top of a rail car truck. So a rail truck or a wheel set, it's the part, the wheels that the box car sits on top of. And these things were never attached to the box cars. So it somehow rolled off the back of the deck and sank like a paperweight to the bottom of the lake, like a stone, because it's just solid iron. And the ship actually ends up settling right on top of it. Kind of crazy. But it's about 120 feet, 125 feet deep here. And this is one thing that I always liked going and visiting and trying to get good pictures of when I dove this wreck. Brian Bachholt here is shining his light, and he's behind that prop. I believe that's also a 10 or a 12-foot diameter prop. So that was one of the neat parts of this vessel. This is one of my favorite pictures of it. It was also a full-page photograph in Scuba Diving magazine many years ago. Brian is, I believe this was probably the same dive, maybe a different dive. Hard to remember. I've probably been on it about 30 times in my life. But Brian is lighting up the hawse hole on the starboard side. That's where the anchor chain would have gone through and connected to the anchor. So it gives you an idea of the size. It's probably 25 or 30 feet tall off the lake bottom there. Now, we talked about wooden superstructures on these vessels oftentimes blowing off due to built up air pressure. And this is certainly one of those extreme cases. The entire pilot house and chart room as a unit was blown off and no doubt floated for a little bit because it was a wooden structure until it ended up sinking. It settled 80 feet or so off the port bow of the vessel. The vessel itself is actually behind in the background of this image, although we can't see it because it's a little dark. It was at the end of the day, so there was not a lot of sunlight, and also the visibility was not great. But it settled on the lake bottom about 80 feet off the wreck. And Cameron Wilson, my dive buddy here, is lighting up one of the window openings, and then we've got an off-camera light inside there. We were doing a planned photo shoot and trying to get some really spooky, cool pictures with off-camera lighting and so forth. So that was a lot of fun. But also, divers may recall that the name Milwaukee, the name of the vessel, is still visible in yellow paint above the side door. There's a side door here, and there's one on the other side of the pilot house, and you can still see the name even to this day. So that's what I have for you guys. And I'm going to just sort of leave it on this slide for just a few seconds. Is a list of all the shipwrecks in all 5 of the Great Lakes that I've dove on over the years. I've been on well over 100 shipwrecks. And it's just been a great odyssey traveling around North America, photographing all of these incredible historical time capsules. And so anyways, that's what I have. And at this point, I would love to answer any questions that we may have collected along the way.
Okay, we do have a question from, I lost it. There it is, Rich Venuti. He asked what camera setup you're using.
I was using, I've always been a Canon guy, and I take a lot of heat from my Nikon friends about using that. They say that they make great copiers. But most of the photographs we looked at tonight were shot with a Canon Rebel, a T1i Rebel. And I use an Ikelite housing with Ikelite DS-161 movie strobes as on-camera strobe lighting. And then I use some 6,000 lumen off-camera lights, Nemo Max Plancks, for stuff when we'd set lights like on the floor of the pilot house there.
Okay, then Don and Tom asked about the divers that you mentioned that have lost their lives, and what was the cause of this?
The divers on the Prince Willem, I never knew any of them personally, but from what I've been told and read over the years, most of them lost their lives due to buoyancy control issues inside the wreck, meaning that they were inside in an overhead environment, got tangled up in entanglement hazards, whether they be cables or fallen walls or whatever, and they were not able to get out. They either ran out of air or they took their gear off to try and get out if they were tangled up. There was various issues with that, and I believe one guy took his gear off to try and get untangled, and then his gear had all the weight, so his gear went down and he went up, and he was in a buoyant dive suit, and he was trapped in the upper part of the enclosed space and was unable to get out.
Let's see. Marty Holmes asked, do divers have a code of ethics to leave artifacts?
Great question, Marty. In 1980, I want to say 87, something called the Abandoned Shipwreck Acts was passed. And it was a law that basically stated that the bottom of the Great Lakes belonged to whatever state owned those bottom lands, because Michigan and Wisconsin will share part of Lake Michigan. There's sort of a line going down the state or down the lake, down the middle of the lake. And one side is Michigan's, one side is Wisconsin's, and the states own everything that is on the bottom of the Great Lakes on their land. It is actually illegal to take anything from the bottom and or disturb a shipwreck or remove anything from a shipwreck. So we have a motto: take only pictures, leave only bubbles. Although this was not always the case. In the heyday of skin diving and scuba diving back in the 60s and the 70s, when Great Lakes diving really started taking off, there were no such laws, and you could take whatever you wanted. And so guys would oftentimes strap large crescent wrenches to their belts, and that was kind of their weights. They'd go down, they'd remove portholes and boy, anything they could get off the ship just to put in their rec rooms or their man caves or whatever. But yeah, that practice is no longer, it's not legal. It hasn't been for decades.
Okay, Sue Montgomery asks how you prepare for an exploration. How do you find the wreck? Do you need to get a permit? Things like that.
Oh, really good question. Most of the wrecks, I mean, almost all the wrecks that I looked at that we looked at tonight were already found, and they were known coordinates. Dive boats go to them. So I don't personally own a boat. I never have. I pay somebody else money to take me to one of these things, and then when I come back to port, I leave. I don't have to, maintain it or scrub the bottom in the fall or any of that stuff. But if it's a well-known wreck, there's always going to be some reference to it in a book somewhere, and so I will read up on it if I know I'm going there. Familiarize myself with the wreck, maybe what kind of condition it's still in, if they're, where the photogenic parts of the wreck are, because as an underwater photographer, of course, I'm always looking for the pretty parts of the wreck. Usually the pointy end and the round end are the two usual suspects. So that I try and do a little reading, try and do a little, prepare myself before I get there so I know what I'm looking at. Although there's been wrecks where I had no clue what they were going to be. Ross Richardson, who's in the audience tonight, took Steve Weimer, one of the guys in all these pictures, and myself to the Cayuga in extreme northeastern Michigan 3 years ago. I knew nothing about the Cayuga. It was 200 some or 300 foot long freighter. Knew nothing about it. I didn't know, what to expect when I got 100 feet down. And that was kind of interesting because we had all of our cameras and lights and we did a photo shoot, but we had to actually swim the length of the wreck first to see, where's the best spot, where's to catch some really cool photographs. And then we had to work like crazy to get the photographs before we ran out of breathing gas and time.
Okay. Nikki wants to know how long you've been diving.
I certified in 1999, so not that long, really, 23 years.
There's lots of comments about what a great program it was and how much they enjoyed it. And Mark Skursky said that he doesn't have a question. He just wants to say he enjoyed the presentation and he hopes you'll get a chance to dive together, dive the Arabia, Forest City or other wrecks near Toby.
Yes, thank you, Mark. Thanks for tuning in, and hopefully I can get back to Tobermory soon. I miss it. Just talking to Stu Selden and Corey Collier the other day about got to get back there. This whole border closing thing was pretty rough, and Tobermory is absolutely one of the best places on the planet to dive Great Lakes, dive shipwrecks. So, yep, hopefully we'll get a chance to do it one of these days.
I apologize for not coming back on camera, but when I try to click on the video, obviously I can't be seen. I'm trying to be, but I can't. But at least my voice is here, so I can. I click on start video and it tells me I can't. Anyway, if no one, does anyone have any more questions? There's Nikki said that she enjoyed it, and so did her 7 and 9-year-olds.
Great, cool. Maybe we'll make divers out of them. Who knows? Ross, thanks for tuning in tonight.
Hey, great program. Thanks a lot.
Absolutely, and thank you, Rich Venuti, and a bunch of other folks that I know. Thank you to everybody for tuning in.
Okay. Oh, wait, I got another one. Tom Collins, have you ever done a dive on any other type of wrecks? Like an airplane? I
have. I've been on several airplanes, although none of them were accidentally there. They were all put down in either a quarry or the Caribbean for a movie set or for diver attraction. I've been on cars, trucks, old steam shovels, submarine, underwater habitats that were left underwater. Yeah, all kinds of crazy stuff under there. But shipwrecks are the prettiest. They just evoke that. I don't know what it is. It's the lure of the sea. It's the danger of ocean crossings or lake crossings and death that is always a possibility when you travel by ship. That just seems to keep people interested, and certainly has kept my camera interested for almost 20 years now.
I think it's a fascinating topic. I'm so glad that I heard about you and I was able to get you to speak for our patrons, because I can tell they really enjoyed it.
Well, it was my honor and my pleasber. Thank you for having me. I enjoyed it very much, and everybody was a great audience. Great questions.
Rich said he'll be in Tobermory in August and to come on up.
Okay, we'll see what we can do.
Okay, well, good night, everyone. Thank you so much for joining, and thank you so much, Cal. I really enjoyed it. It was a great program.
Thank you, Janet. Thank you, everyone. Have a wonderful evening. Be safe.
Yes. Good night, everyone.